Welcome to Unit 3, Sprites in Details. This video will be going over Section 3.1, everything you ever wanted to know about sprites inside of Scratch. The good news, a lot of the details that you will see here within Scratch help build the groundwork for you to cross these skills over into more advanced programs. Some programs I'll be covering, such as Unity, here in future videos, which that is the ultimate goal of learning how to program if you're interested in game design or simulations. Okay, that's my sales pitch for Unity, just for the record there. By the end of Unit 3, you will have learned the following: how to access your sprite information and change the properties of your sprite. Important. These details will save you in the long run. It's pretty advanced to think that you can access all this information just from a graphical user interface such as Scratch, or, again, sales pitch, within Unity when you look at the properties for your sprites and objects. You're going to learn how to create sprite with the paint tools, which are pretty neat for Scratch. It's pretty impressive that they incorporate those. And you'll also learn how to import sprites from other libraries. You're going to learn how to import and create sounds for your sprites. We won't get into the details of actually engineering our own audio. We'll more or less just import the audio. Working with audio can be pretty advanced, and that's basically a course all to itself. Last point down here, I'm at this one. Understand the basic concept of a costume center of a sprite. If you don't understand that costume center, you are going to find yourself getting into multiple headaches. And just before we go on, you'll notice I changed up the appearance of this presentation. I'm going to run the presentations out of Adobe Acrobat now, just so you can see the interface of the software, because many of you will have this curriculum at your workstations and you'll be able to access this, and just seeing it helps you out a little bit more. I guess I could move that up to the side. Before we jump into section 3.1, here's some terminology you've heard me talk about in other videos. I can't stress this enough. A sprite is an object in a video game that the player computer can interact with. The term sprite is synonymous with the term object. Okay, you'll hear me saying the word object, sprite. It's not because I'm confused, it's just because those terms are synonymous with each other and I just can't get it out of my head. Sometimes I'll call it an object, sometimes I'll call it a sprite. Now, for the record, objects, they're a little bit more advanced in their definition than a sprite, because you'll work with objects when you get in more advanced programming languages such as Java, C#. But the actual definition of object, it's an object contains properties about it and can be programmed to perform certain actions. And down here on my sub-bullets, you say, for example, if you have a sprite that has an elf, it'll have certain properties such as pointy ears, short, and a beard. And the object will also have behaviors such as it can run and jump. So those are important details with an object, that it's got properties such as physical properties, and then it also has behavior properties. If you think of chemistry, elements have chemical and physical properties. Objects inside programming have properties that are essentially the object that make it up. I guess you could call these physical properties. And in this case, it also has some sort of action-based property on how it can go and interact with other things, or there's that word I like to use, behaviors. Section 3.1, information and creating sprites. So our sprites, they're pretty advanced, even in Scratch, and we're going to go over these three tabs of our sprites here. These are tabs that have property information for the sprite. First is our scripts tab, and the scripts tab is going to have all the scripts for the sprite. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Scratch here, and hopefully this shows up on the video. So right there is the scripts tab, and this will allow you to access all the programming blocks like so. Back to our presentation. Next we have the costumes tab. This is going to list all the costumes for your sprite, and well, the example in the book shows 4 costumes. I'm going to pull up a sprite here. Click on the costumes tab like so, and this particular sprite has 2 costumes within it already. So the costumes come preloaded for the sprites. These are ones that have been provided for you from Scratch, which was developed by MIT. Some sprites have maybe 3 or 4 or 5. It really depends on what they've made. We'll be working with some sprites in our advanced programs that have maybe 20 or 30 different costumes for it. And you can put even more. I've had some sprites that have had 100 costumes because we had some very complex animations that were trying to mimic 3D. So you can get very, very, very crazy advanced with the number of costumes. Next is our Sounds tab. And our Sounds tab does exactly what you think. It's going to allow you to create sounds. Well, not so much create sounds, you can import sounds, but you can go through and edit the sounds. And we'll get into a lot more details on how to do all that in the future. But just know this is where all your sounds are going to be located for the sprite. And you can actually have more than one. Again, I've had some sprites, I've had 10, 15, 20 different sounds programmed with them. Now you do have to watch out. Sometimes if you keep duplicating sprites and duplicating the sounds, it can start making your program get pretty lengthy in the amount of data it's going to take up when you store it. And the same thing goes for costumes. More costumes you have, the more memory it's going to take up on your hard drive to store those programs. I went back to the presentation here, and there's some details with the costumes I forgot to mention. With the costumes, you can add, remove, and edit these costumes from the tab. So if you have your program up like so, you can come in here and start messing around with the actual image, and we'll get into the details about how to do the artwork. But if you wanted to, you can come in here and start getting your sprites looking either better or worse, really depending on your artistic skills. Over here on the Sounds tab, we click on the Sounds tab. We can again edit the sounds, but one thing I forgot to mention is that we can actually record sounds by clicking on the record button over here. You have to have a microphone installed on your computer in order to access this feature. A simple microphone will work. You don't need to go out and spend $100. And you can get a $5 or $10 microphone, and a lot of laptops already have them built in, so you can go ahead and work those if everything is set up properly. Next, we're going to move it into our Sprite information panel. This is going to contain all the details that you need to know for your sprite. Now, you don't have to live inside the panel, but it's good to see these details so you can go through and maybe problem solve your sprite, or you can figure out how to make it more interactive with other elements within Scratch, or objects, excuse me. So this is a snapshot of what that actually looks like. I'm going to go ahead and pull up Scratch because it's a little bit more fun to actually use the software. So I'm going to pull it up right here, and actually I can arrange it like so. We can fit it within the recording. You would click on this little eye on the sprite icon. So you click on that, it's going to open up the panel for you. And once it opens up the panel, and Scratch doesn't look like this normally, I just drag it off to the side. So right there is going to be your sprite name. Over here is the actual icon of what the sprite looks like. It's based upon the costume that's currently selected. So if I went back up to costumes, clicked on that, then you'll notice my sprite's icon is based upon its current costume selected. So if you have something different on your screen, don't get confused. Just understand that the costume determines what the icon will be. Next, we have the XY coordinates for the sprite, the X0 and the Y0. If I move my sprite around, you'll notice that the coordinates update for its current XY coordinate position. Next, we have the directional tab. This will allow you to see which direction it's facing. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but there's going to be times where this thing is moved around and you can't tell where it's at, and it's good to know which direction it's facing. Over here's the rotation style. This allows you to determine if the sprite can rotate 360 degrees, if it's only going to be able to rotate 180 degrees, or it's going to stay static in its current position. So let's just quickly look at this. If we have it set to this position, no matter what degree or direction I make the sprite turn, it's going to always face this way. It's not going to turn. If I choose this one, you'll notice that it moves either left or right. And then over here, the 360, you saw that earlier, that allows it to go in 360 degrees. Next, this feature right here can be dragged by a player. By clicking on this feature, whenever the program is full screen only, like so, it allows you to drag the sprite around on the screen. That only works in full screen mode. If you have it deselected, you'll notice right here you can still drag the sprite around, but when you go to full screen mode, it won't let you drag the sprite around. Next, the show button, and this is critical. It doesn't seem that big of a deal, but there's going to be times where you can't find your sprite. You'll have to go into its information panel, click on show to make it appear. Sometimes it'll disappear just because you've programmed to hide in your function and it's buried in there. You didn't know why. You can't figure out where it's at, or it's buried within layers and layers and layers of objects. Clicking on the show button can make sure that you know exactly where it is on the screen visually, and you can also look at its XY coordinates. I want to show you something real quick. There's some confusion about this every time I teach it. Let's go back to this rotation style for the sprite. Granted, its direction it's facing is negative 103 degrees. And a lot of people are thinking, well, if it's facing this way, it has to move that way, okay, because that's the way it's looking. That's not true. We're going to use this move block here, and we're going to, let's just put that up there. We're not doing anything serious. We're just going to tell it to keep moving 10 steps. Matter of fact, I'm going to make it 1 step. So when I click on the green flag, it's going to move at that negative 103 degrees. If I turn it around, say 41 degrees, it's still going 41 degrees upwards. If I say make it 72 or whatever, I can change its direction, but the sprite stays looking exactly the same. This is a pretty cool feature, especially if you don't want your sprite to change the way it looks, but you do want the sprite to be able to move around the screen in any sort of direction. Now, the same holds true if we were to select the rotation style of 180 degrees. Okay, I can change its direction, it still moves, but once we break that kind of, I call it a barrier, but once you go from, say, 90 degrees or less, that's when it changes its costume, and it's kind of drifting off there. Let's get back down. And then, of course, if we went to the 360, you'll notice that the sprite points in the direction that it should be facing. Sprites. How do we get them? Easy. We get them for free. Well, I guess you could go pay money, but I wouldn't pay any money for sprites. At least not if I was just learning. If you're trying to learn how to do this, don't pay money for sprites. Some of you will get very excited about making programs. Just don't do it. You're going to save yourself a lot of money just by using the free ones. Learn. Then once you got a good product idea, use a real software that can allow for a production quality program, such as Unity. Oh, there you go again, or the Unreal Development Kit. You know, something that can help get it to the marketplace. Okay, so sprites. Where do we get them? Well, if you look in the presentation here, we got 3 icons, and this is from the Scratch software. Yeah, I'll just pull up Scratch again. It's just so much more fun. Anytime you open up a Scratch program, you will always have the Scratch cat like so. And it always will be called Sprite 1. Now you can get into the actual root files of Scratch and change that. However, for simplicity, it's best just to roll with what they give you when you start off. There's 4 ways to get a sprite on screen. First, you can choose from the sprite library. These are all images and graphics that have been provided to you from the good people at MIT. You can go through these and check them out. Some of these images actually have multiple costumes with it. Let's see, maybe this parrot has one. And there it is, look at that. Next, our other option to create sprites is by clicking on this little paintbrush right here. And by clicking on the paintbrush, it creates this sprite. And that's not very much fun. So what we need to do is we need to go over here. Let's make this full screen. And we need to draw our sprite. And there's a lot of different tools here, and we'll get into the details of how to use this. I'll show off my art skills here for you. And I am infamous throughout the world for drawing cats, believe it or not. Let's what kind of color cat do we want? We'll make a blue cat. So you can use these different tools here within Scratch to draw items onto the scene. Let's make its eyes kind of white. There we go. We're going to draw another one. Then we'll change it to black. Trust me, this will be a blue cat before you know it. Alright. These features are all pretty cool. There's different ways to draw a cat, obviously, but there's also different ways to draw within Scratch. And let's see if we can get this cat up there. Oh no, it's not turning out very good. Alright, that is my cat. Oh, let's make its mouth black. There we go. I guess we need some whiskers, don't we? So, I bet you didn't know you're getting all this for free. Alright, that's on the house. If you see these t-shirts at the mall, make sure you pick one up, alright? So, you can sit there and draw sprites. They show up on the screen, and you can move them around, and they can interact. You can make them spin around. You can do all sorts of stuff with this just by drawing on it. Next, our other way to get a sprite is by uploading it from the file. You have to have these already stored on your computer as artwork and put them inside the program. I don't have any readily available, and you'll see by working on our programs on how to do that in the future. But it's real simple. You just click on the button, then you go through your file systems and just try to go through and locate where you have all those different files. Next, we have a camera, and by clicking on that icon, it's going to bring up the camera. And my hair is a mess. I'm kind of deathly afraid of clicking on this right now. I paused the video to put a hat on. Let's see if my camera works. I'd never used the camera on my laptop, so if it doesn't work, hopefully yours will work better than mine. Oh, there, it worked. So, I'm Ryan. Hope you're having fun. Sorry, I had to pause the video there. My dog started barking. So those are the 4 ways you can get sprites onto your scene. And while we have this open, let's go ahead and talk about the Paint editor. There's 2 different versions of the Paint editor. You have a bitmap mode, which is traditional for Scratch, and then they have the vector mode. And you click on vector, you'll notice all the tools show up on the right hand side. Bitmap mode, all the tools are on the left hand side. Bitmap and vector graphics are visually close, however aesthetically they're very different, especially when you get into the details. We're going to start off with bitmap mode, excuse me, and these are going to be your raster type graphics. I'm going to pull up my presentation because it's a little bit easier to go through and list all these details of the tools as opposed to trying to do it from memory. So this is a screenshot of the bitmap mode, and you'll notice I've listed out all the tools here. And the first one right up here, it's not a tool, but it's going to be the name of the costume that we're working on. So if we come back to Scratch, you'll notice that the name is right there. Then we have our paintbrush. The paintbrush allows you to draw on the screen, and that can be manipulated with the line width down here. Then you can choose your color, whatever it is that you want. Next, we have a line tool. Click on the line tool. We can draw straight lines. If we hold down the shift key allows us to make the line straight on a horizontal, or hold down shift and it goes straight on a vertical. Now you notice this is still the same costume up here, and that costume is for the sprite, so when we move the sprite around, all that crazy artwork shows up. Next, we have the rectangle tool. I'm going to go ahead and clear all this artwork out. Still the same costume. Go to my rectangle tool. There's 2 variations of the rectangle. We have the solid rectangle, and then we have just the outline of the rectangle. So that kind of looks like a face when you look at it. So if we drew a outline of a rectangle, it would appear like so. And if we were to draw a solid shape, it would appear like that. Next on our list for the sprite image editor here, let's see, we just went through the rectangle, and then we're now moving on to the ellipse, or circles if you will. Let's go ahead and clear everything out. By clicking on the clear button, it removes all of the graphics on this image. And just so you know, you have to have at least 1 pixel in order for a costume to exist, and that pixel will be 1 by 1. Whether you can see that or not, I know I personally can't see it, but I'm also over the age of 40 and have bad eyesight. So, anywho, here we go. This is drawing an ellipse. You can draw all sorts of ellipses. You saw me when I was showing off my cat drawing skills. And just so you know, before this video is over, not this video, but other videos, I'll draw you a very good cat. To draw a perfect circle, you hold down the Shift key and click and drag. This is very similar to other graphic programs you may have seen in the past, such as Microsoft Paint or maybe Photoshop or some of the other programs that you just hold down the Shift key to make it a perfect shape. So just hold down Shift. Again, now the sprite editor is a little gimmicky sometimes. You'll notice that our options disappeared here on the screen. To get the outline, just click on the little outline shape and then you can start drawing from there. And you can always go through and change the colors to draw the shapes as you see fit. Next we have the text tool, and the text tool will allow you to type text onto the sprite costume. You just click in there and then you can type in whatever you want. Whoops. Now just so you know, the text is actually considered part of the sprite in addition to all these different items that we have here. So if you want to, you can click and drag the text around, and let's click off over here so it kind of sets in. Sometimes, there we go. So the text showed up on the portion of the costume like so. You can actually, once you put the text on, you should know that you can't go back and edit the text. It's kind of weird, but that's just what happens once it embeds the pixels into the image. So the text is no longer available to you if you try to go and edit it. If you wanted to get rid of this text, and you'll notice I got a text box showing up, I'm going to get rid of that. One thing I would do is I would just click on the rectangle, get the same shape and color that I was using before, and then just draw over it so it's officially gone. Text also, you can go down here and choose some different font types. There's not a whole lot of fonts available to you in Scratch, but again, this is a learning software and it'll help get you started. If you need to, you can always do this. You can go into, say, Microsoft PowerPoint or Word, and you can create whatever it is that you want with the fonts, and then you can save it as the image as a JPEG or a PNG file, and then import that into your Scratch program by clicking on this button right here. Next, we have the fill bucket tool here. I can't remember the name. I always call it the paint bucket tool. So the paint bucket tool allows you to fill in images. And let's go down here and look at our different gradients. The gradients will be based upon the two colors that you have selected over here. So if I have blue and yellow, these are the type of gradients available to me. However, if you click on the second color, it'll make it the first primary color, and it'll change how the gradient looks. So you can go through and you can make some decent looking gradients with these items. And if I wanted to flip-flop it there, I can come over here and change that as well. Now you notice I filled in a black circle with the image. If we zoom in on this, you'll notice that there's some pixels still hanging around here. And some people get in trouble whenever they make games because we start detecting for particular colors colliding with each other based upon the RGB values. And if we zoom in a little bit more, there we go. You can see that black and gray are still part of the outline of this image, even though we filled it, and technically it should be completely filled 100% by this gradient fill. However, that doesn't always happen to be the case. So just keep that in mind if you do use the gradient fill, and visually it appears as if it's just that shape, or excuse me, just those colors, but just know that there are some colors hiding inside of there. If we go over here to our red one where we filled in the red circle, we won't see that issue with that because the red circle is separate from the actual fill, because the fill was in the transparent section of the red ellipse that was empty in the middle. But if we zoom in a little bit more, you'll notice that there's a little bit of whiteness inside there. So that could be an issue, or it could not be an issue. It really just depends on what's going on with your program. So just watch out. Next we have our erase tool, and if we want to, let's zoom out, and we can start erasing just by holding the mouse button down and just moving it wherever. And you can choose the size of the erase tool as well to make it very large if you just want to completely get rid of large sections of stuff. Now let's go back to this ellipse that had these weird images right here. Or not weird images, but weird colors. And let's move up here so we can see some of it. If y'all hear a noise in the background, that's my dog. He's relaxing beside me. Okay, so let's say we have these images right here and we want to get rid of them. We could, if we have time, which I don't have a lot of it, but if we have time, we can go through and we can delete these images very slowly and get rid of all those little pixels. Okay, and I think other programs will be better at this than, say, Scratch, because you can't really get the erase tool as small as the pixel of the graphic, but nonetheless you can still do that if you need to remove little distorted images like this, and it works better if you click and drag than trying to go pixel by pixel on here. Next we have the select tool, and the select tool allows you to select a section, and if you want to you can hit delete, or we can undo that right here. And we can select it and we can move it. And we can also do other things with this as well with the select tool. Let's say, let's draw a shape here. Give you a good example. I'm going to pause the video and draw a shape so you don't have to sit through the pain of my artwork. Alright, I spent about an hour drawing this little shape here. That's a joke. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the select tool and go ahead and select it. Hopefully your artwork's better than mine. And then on my keyboard, I'm going to hit Control-C. If I hit right-click on here, you can't access the copy and paste or copy, cut, and paste type features. Instead, I'm going to hit Control-C on my keyboard, and then I'm going to hit Control-V to paste it and put it right there. And then I'm going to come up here on this little handy tool called Flip. And it's technically flip on the horizontal, so it's flipping across the Y-axis, but for simplicity purposes, it says flip left right. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And then we can move our identical shape right here. And, well, it's supposed to look like a heart. Maybe click off to the side, and there you have it. So you can use the select tool to select parts of it and change it and move it around however you want to. You can also delete with the select tool as well by selecting something and deleting it. Next, let's look at the Magic Wand tool. And the Magic Wand tool, if you use, say, Photoshop this or maybe Paint.net, this works a little bit different. And almost, in my mind, it works reverse of what those two tools do. So what you do with this is you select an area on the screen that you want to keep, and then you click off to the side, and it's going to delete everything else on the costume. So you can see everything I had around here is now officially gone. Okay, so the only thing that's left is whatever I selected. If you click on the undo button, you can bring everything back. It will, okay, we have to click on it. Alright, it's still messing with me here. So that way you can bring everything back by selecting different tools and clicking on undo. Next we have the stamp tool. With this you can use it to select images and duplicate them. Drag. It's also actually you have to click and drag to select. This is a duplicate tool, click on not the stamp tool. And from there you can what we do is we come here and select the image we want. Then we click on the duplicate, and you'll notice nothing happens. Okay, it's a little cumbersome. You have to go back and reselect it, and then you can drag off the duplicate. I'm not a big fan of this tool. I think it's a little, like I said, too cumbersome. Me personally, I'd rather just select it, hit Control-C, then hit Control-V, and now I can go through and duplicate the image and place it wherever I want. And it also gives me an opportunity, if I keep hitting Control-V, I can see the image while I'm moving my mouse around on where I'm going to place it onto the costume. And it also allows me to easily and quickly place multiple duplicates of the image on there. I don't have to go and reselect this every time that I want to, change it up. And I think that's all for the major tools for your bitmap art tools there. Again, up here's the undo, redo buttons. Over here, we can clear, we can add and import. Of course, clear clears out the image. Add, we can go and add images in from the Sprite image library. Let's say I bring in this happy guy right here. Oh, excuse me, happy girl. And then we can go and add another image. Let's say this airplane. And And we can move it around, and I mean, we can do all sorts of stuff with this, and put the costume on where we're going to put it. I guess we can make it look like they're riding the airplane or something. So, oh, that stinks. Move it up there. Well, anyhow, you get the idea of adding images. And then you can also import from your hard drive other images. Let's see what else we need to cover here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these items over here, and we're also going to mess around with the colors a little bit, just so you can see that. What we're going to do with these items is that we're going to, and I don't think that's it. Is that a pixel? Okay, so we're going to add an image. We'll just pick a random one. Let's go with this apple. That's good. So we have the apple right here. With these tools up here, we can flip it left and right, as you saw before. We can also flip it vertically, up and down, where we can change how the image looks. And this is an important item right here. We can set the costume center. And I'll talk more in detail about this when we get into some other items in Scratch. But the costume center determines where the center of the costume for the sprite will be located. Right now, the center of this costume is down here, even though the image is right up here. So to center the costume on the actual image, I have to click on the image. And boom, it should be right there. And in order to get the costume center moved off of this image, you have to hit the escape key. In my case, when I was setting the costume center, I clicked right there, but it keeps following my mouse around. So what I would do is I'd click right here, right about there, then hit the escape key, so that way it's centered right in on the middle of the sprite. Now let's look at the importance for this over here. So we have our sprite image over here, and let's say we're going to rotate it around. Okay, you'll notice it rotates kind of like in a center pivot style. If I come over here to its costume center, and let's set it to down here below the image, then I come over here and move the sprite around. Notice how it rotates around the center pivot. That's actually below it. And I click down below the sprite right about here. And that causes the sprite to be off of the center. And this causes people to get a little bit, whoa. Okay, you also saw something new happen there. But back to the costume center. The center is the center pivot point for the sprite. And you have to make sure if you have it right on the image if you want it to rotate around the center of the image. There are some times where this is very beneficial to have it rotate around a center pivot point that's actually off the image. And that is quite convenient in some cases, and it can also be quite frustrating in other cases. Because if we look at our, what was a formerly an apple is now a half apple. Okay, if we look at its XY coordinates, it's -54, -198. That's based upon the center position, which is, let's see if I can get my mouse exactly where it's at. -54, I may not be exactly, but I'll be pretty close. Was it -98? So, it's kind of hard to do and record a video at the same time. But you get the idea of what's happening here. So the center of the costume is down here at those XY coordinates. But if you look up here and I put my mouse above the actual image, my mouse is at -53.63. Okay, so the location of the graphic is at -55-ish, +60. While the center is down here at -54, -98. So the center of the image is in the quadrant 3, and the actual graphic image is up here in quadrant 2. That can be confusing to people, especially when you're programming your sprite and you want it to go to a particular XY coordinate. Let's say I want this at 0, 0. So I want to tell it to go to 0, 0. Actually, we're going to do two things. We're going to set the direction to 90 degrees so it's completely lined up on how it should be. Then we're going to tell it to go to 0, 0. And you'll notice 0, 0 should be right here in the middle area. But the image is up here. It's because the center is down here. In order for this to be down in the image, I have to actually move this down a certain number of unit values on the y-axis to get it to line up. And I can kind of guesstimate what that would be. So I put my mouse up here. It's at -161-ish. So I'm going to set the Y down to say -160, and let's click right there, and now my image is close to a 0, 0 position based upon the center actually being down here. I having to use some deductive reasoning in order to get it down here. That can be very frustrating, especially if you don't want that. So if you're having problems with your images, come back and check the costume center. Now back to something weird that happened. You'll notice that my image, when I was clicking on the costume center, Scratch was giving me a little bit of a fit with this, and this can happen, and it's not good, is that when I was clicking on the costume center, it kept recentering the position or resetting the location of the position on the screen, and it moved it off. I didn't do it, but Scratch moved it off, and when it moved it off, it truncated all the graphics. So the apple has actually been cut in half by default from Scratch. And that's part of the problem with the Scratch Paint Editor. It's a great tool, but it does have limited features. If I click on Undo, I can bring it back. And there I reset my costume center, hit Escape, and I'm going to click on the Scripts tab. I'm going to come over here, and I went ahead and pause the video to set up my little function. It's still pointing at 90 degrees, and I set the coordinates to 0, 0. When I click on this function to make it run, you'll notice that it sets the apple to 0, 0, and it looks like it's in the middle because my costume center was set in the middle. Let's go back to our costumes tab. In this image right here, we're going to zoom in a little bit, and I want to mess around with the graphics a little bit just so you can get an idea of what's going on with this color palette down here. If I click on my paint bucket tool, again, I can choose any color in here to paint it and fill it in. It's pretty easy. However, one thing you can also do is by selecting on this red line, that's a transparent tool. So what I can do is I can come in here and click on, well, make sure your paint bucket tool is selected. Then you can click on a particular color, and it's going to make it transparent. And if I zoom in, you can see that, whoops, clicked on a color there. We can come up here, and you can see that this is transparent. These little gray and white checkered boxes, that is kind of, I guess, kind of the graphic industry standard for letting you know that it's transparent. So when I clicked on that, it made that little part of the stem transparent. And if I drew some sort of other image, or if you look over here in my scene, you can notice that the stem, whatever color is behind it, still appears on the screen. Let me make it large so you can see it. I know I told you never to do this, but in this example, it actually is a very helpful tool. So there we go. So you can see that the stem is now transparent. You can see the little cat's eye peeking out behind the stem there. So that's very, very handy. Also, you can, if you want to select a particular color, you can pick a color from the image to get the exact color that you want. I was almost going to say the RGB value. Technically, that's what you're getting, but Scratch doesn't get into those details. If you don't know what RGB is, it's red, green, blue, and it's a number system in layman terms that helps the computer stay organized on what colors can appear on the screen. And if you also want to select another color, say I really like this blue. Actually, I don't think it'll let you do that anymore. Yeah, it won't let us do that. You used to be able to click on other colors. I think that was the old version of Scratch. So let's go back to my apple here. And I think the color tool, if I click, whoops, if I click on, no, it won't let us select any stuff. Okay, so they've cleaned that up. Nonetheless, it lets you select any color that happens to be in the image. If you need a very detailed color that you don't see in the palette, you can use the tool down here to allow you to actually access a palette of colors kind of on the gradient, where you can get very precise colors. And you can click and drag your mouse to move around. And you can also darken it or line it up based upon moving the scale right here. One other thing, you notice the negative and positive magnifying glasses over here. I've been using these, haven't really talked about them, but it zooms in, zooms out. And this percent tells you what percentage you are on the costume of your magnification. And that pretty much wraps it up for bitmap mode. Let's go ahead and move into the vector graphic mode. Now that we're in vector graphics are a totally different animal than your raster bitmap graphics. And these use a mathematical algorithm to draw the shapes. And the good news is you won't have to do any math. The bad news is using vector graphics at first is a little bit cumbersome. I'm not an expert on vector graphics. I've used them when I would program in Flash or maybe InDesign whenever I was using it to create books. And a little bit of Adobe Illustrator. So I'm not an expert on vector graphics. And the good news is to use the vector graphics in Scratch, you don't have to be an expert either. Okay, right now we have a raster image that's now been converted to vector. And with my select tool up here, let's see what happens when I select it. Okay, it selects the whole image. All right, and you're thinking, well, okay, that's about to be expected. But in the raster bitmap mode, you couldn't do that. You couldn't move the whole image around. You had to select the whole image to move it. Here, it treats this whole image as it's one unit. Next, we have the reshape, and if I click on this, you'll notice nothing happens. That's because, again, the vector mode thinks that this is just one unit. It doesn't see it as different parts. So if you take a raster graphic and move it over to the vector mode, you're not going to be able to really use the features of vector like you would want. However, you can implement these and combine them and make some really cool artwork. I've seen some students do that with some very, very good success rates in the past. But for our purposes of learning, we're just going to delete that happy little apple, and we're going to add an image that I think is going to have some vector graphics. Any photograph on here, or pretty much any place you see them, is going to most likely not be a vector graphic. Most photographs are going to be JPEGs, your JPG files, or you'll see some photographs stored as a PNG file. In Scratch, let's get our apple back here. Let's stick with that. So we got our apple here, and our apple, this is going to be a good vector graphic. And I'm guessing that's vector just based upon the smoothness of the lines, and it just seems like it's a vector graphic because vector graphics don't have a lot of color variations. They seem to be very kind of like simplistic, but they also have a nice, smooth, very precise drawing about them. Most of your graphic images you see on business cards or billboards, those are vectors because they're scalable, so that way you can shrink them. Yeah, this is vector. And they don't lose their clarity. If I had my other apple back, let's see if I can get it back. There it is. Okay, if I try to make it larger or smaller, you notice it starts getting pixelated. When I say pixelated, I'm talking about all those little jagged edges on the side become more transparent. Whereas with my apple, let me get that back for you. There, we got it back. Now if I take this apple and I make it larger or smaller, you'll notice that there's no real pixelation there on the edges. That's because the algorithm used to draw the shape makes it very, very, very smooth. Now let's look at some of the other tools here in our vector graphics. If we click on this reshape tool, we can come in and choose different parts of the apple and start kind of playing around with it and changing how it looks. Okay, you can get pretty abstract with what you do with your apple here, and might stumble upon something pretty neat or something that's very unusual, and I'm cool with unusual. So that's what the reshape does. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it back. Okay, so clicked on undo to get my apple back to the way it should be. Then we have our pencil tool, and the pencil, say I'm drawing this line right here. Okay, did you see what happened right there? Let's zoom in a little bit. It's kind of hard to see. I drew with my shaky mouse here this line, and then when I unclick it, you'll notice that the program kind of straightens it out a little bit. That's because it's trying to take what I drew and make it a very precise, smooth type line. So vector graphics can make you look like a very good artist. Now also with this pencil tool, I can take my line and I can draw it and connect to other lines so that way they form one shape. Now I don't think this connected. Yeah, okay, it connected, fine. So you'll notice that since I drew them and connected the dots, the computer considered these two separate lines or 3 separate lines to actually become one shape. Again, with the pencil tool, it's a little bit different than what you've used in the past. However, you can get some pretty good results with it. Now you also notice it's not perfect either. And if I zoom in, you can see that there's a little bit of jaggedness here because the program truncated the curvature of the line for whatever reason. So it's not perfect, and that might have something to do with the way I was drawing the lines. They weren't very linear. And again, down here you can select the width of the lines. I think if you select it, you can actually change. There you go. So if you select the shape, you can come down here and change the width afterwards here. So it doesn't have to be the exact width you want at the beginning. You can always go back through and change that. If I make it real small, that probably looks a little bit better than what I originally started with. Next, we have the line tool, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to zoom out. Let's get this to about a medium. And who wants a green line? I've always wanted a green line. So we got a green line, and I'm going to draw the line. And you'll notice I'm just clicking and dragging. I'm not holding the shift key down, and it's drawing the straight line like so. If I click and drag and hold down shift, it'll also draw that line that's either perfect horizontal or perfect vertical. And you can see my mouse, it's bouncing all over the place while I'm clicking and dragging. So that allows me to make some lines that are very precise. And again, you can take your lines and connect the dots. Notice my mouse right here is on top and holding the button down while I drag the line right on top of the other dot. And now it's connected the two, and it made a kind of a nice crisp angle of how the line's connected. And I'm going to do the same thing for this. And now we got that shape. And it's not a perfect shape or whatever it's supposed to be. I was just going to call it a trapezoid, but if you zoom in, you can see I actually got an extra side to it. Not quite sure why, but there it is. That's the line shape. Next we have the rectangle shape. Let's go ahead and select this line and get it out of here and zoom out. And let's pull up our rectangle. And I know some of you have probably been asking me to draw a red rectangle, so here it is. We're going to draw that red rectangle like so, and there you have it. Red rectangle. Next we'll draw a ellipse, and let's make that ellipse kind of a dark purple maroon color, and there's the ellipse. Again, if I hold down the shift key, it draws perfect shape. The text is a little bit better in vector than in the raster graphics, because here I can, why do I always keep hitting that? We can type in, say, our words, we can move it around, and then we can double click inside there, and we can actually go back and change the spelling of our words. So we have some editing features on the vector graphics with the text where we don't have those in raster. I prefer to use the text tool with vector more than I like to use the raster one. Alright, next we have the color as shape. Now this is a little different than the raster paint bucket. You would assume that you could just, let's pick yellow because that'll make it nice and bright. You assume with the paint bucket you just click anywhere and it'll start drawing colors. Not so, it only works on shapes. So I have to pick a shape, and then it allows me to fill in the color on it. And I can pick the outline or the actual interior. Let's make that stem yellow like that. Okay, so it also has the gradient features as well. And these work a little bit better in the vector than they do with the raster. And then we have a duplicate, and the duplicate allows you to select an item, and you'll notice I didn't have to do anything. I just clicked the duplicate button and choose what I want, and it duplicates it. And it works very, very, very well in the vector mode. Now, I'd almost guess that most people out there in the Scratch community are using the vector graphics just because they look cleaner. Okay, next, down here, the layering tools. These are pretty neat. If you click and drag your shape and move it around, and let's say I have this on top of my apple, but I want my apple on top, I can go over here and I'm going to choose back a layer, and I can click on that. Just keep clicking on it until what you're selecting is behind the item that you want. And now the apple is on top of this layer. However, let's say I want this little rectangle to be behind this other one. So I would have it selected and click on back, and then that would send it backwards as well. That wraps it up for section 3.1. Quite a bit of information. Once you get some experience with it, you'll be able to go in there and make some pretty cool graphics and costumes for your sprites. Remember, down here, make sure you have the correct mode selected for which costume you want to work with. If you converted all this back to bitmap, you'll lose a little bit of the quality of the image. You can see that right there with that apple, where it no longer has the nice smoothness. It's a little bit more jagged because it's been converted to bitmap. If I zoom in, you can see those pixelated type curvatures of the apple right there. And also, you also notice I can't go through and select these individual items. I have to go back through and select them like so to move them individually. And if I convert it back to vector, let's see what happens. Now everything's joined as one solid unit. So I created all these individually as vectors, but once I converted it back to bitmap, it fused it all together and made it one raster image. And then I changed my mind, went back to vector, and now it kind of messed everything up, and I can't individually select these items. I can't edit the text. I can't do anything with the image. So make sure you know which image know which mode of the paint tools that you're working with inside Scratch, and I would just stick with one and not try to mix and match them. If you're going to work with two different of the different paint tools, I would start with raster and then convert over to vector, and not the other way around. But that's me personally. Thanks again, and go ahead and look for a video that's covering Unit 3, Section 3.2.